Welcome back to the Intuition Incubator. Today, I have with me Dr. Theresa Bullard Wick, who I've been really excited to interview. Dr. Theresa is a physicist, author, speaker, international teacher, change agent, and the host of Mystery School Teachings on Gaia TV. Throughout her lifelong journey, she's discovered innovative ways to weave together her formal education as a PhD physicist with her deep training in the modern mystery school lineage and a passion for bridging science and spirituality in a practical way. Dr. Theresa has presented to live audiences worldwide since 2002, helping thousands of people awaken to their greater potential, find deeper meaning and purpose, and achieve greater success in life. Welcome, Dr. Theresa.
Thank you, Abby. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
Yes. So I first met you at a conference of yours that I went to, an intimate conference here locally, and was just blown away by so many things that you taught us. And quite frankly, I'm still processing them. And I would love for you to start by kind of sharing because you are a scientist who teaches mysticism,
hmm
basically. I'd love to hear that journey, your journey as a scientist and how, because you don't just meet a lot of scientists. You're not the average bear. Like you don't meet a lot of scientists that are talking about Kabbalah, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if you
Yes.
would kind of share that.
Yeah. So, I think I had the advantage of growing up with a very open minded parents and family. And so while I got exposed to a lot of alternative options when I was young. I didn't necessarily gravitate towards any one thing. When I was younger, I just kind of wanted to fit in and be normal. And then, but as I got older, especially when I got to about 18 and I was searching for university and I wanted to move away from out of state and go to Colorado for university, and then went to especially grad school. So I immersed myself in physics, and it's kind of a journey around what got me into physics. I wasn't expecting to go into physics, but I had a very as I was searching for universities, I'd had kind of a nice experience out in Sedona, Arizona with my mom while we were on a road trip for looking at universities. And we just decided to stop through Sedona on our way. And we'd had this very inspiring, kind of mystical time while we were there, connecting with the energies of the vortex and just getting a little bit of a tour. And then I remember we were driving from Sedona up to Northern Arizona University to go and look at the university. And my mom was driving at night and I was looking out at the stars while she was driving. And I was just marveling. You know how you have that desert sky and it's just, you can see the
Oh,
whole
yeah.
Milky Way. And I was just marveling. And I remember kind of thinking like, oh gosh, I would love to know what's out there. What's going on beyond our mundane little lives here on earth, and there's so much more going on in this universe. And that was the moment where this sort of light bulb turned on in my mind, because I'd been thinking about what am I going to major in, as I'm looking at universities here. And in that moment it was like, oh, that's what I want to know. I want to know about the universe. And so I decided in that moment that I wanted to go into astronomy as a major. And ultimately, I picked the University of Denver as my undergraduate, and they didn't really have astronomy as a major. But when I was talking to the advisor, he said, "Well, if you're thinking about going to get your like going to grad school later, which I had already decided I was going to go as far as I needed to go with my education to not hit the glass ceiling as a woman, right?" And so I just thought, well, yeah, I'm going to go to grad school, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do at this stage. But ultimately, this advisor said, well, what's most important is that you have a solid background in physics, and then you could go into astronomy or astrophysics later when you get into grad school. And I thought, okay, I never would have thought of physics as my trajectory, but I'll give it a try. And so my journey into physics was sort of an intuitive process, if you will. I kind of synchronicity sort of led me into it. But meanwhile, I'd also had this opening up to consciousness and meditation and visualization and spiritual realms, but I didn't really have to define it at that point in my life. It was just kind of, I acknowledged that there was something to it. And I had been exposed to things like brainwave entrainment and visualization and guided imageries through my mom, who was really into a lot of these kinds of things, and she had been part of the Monroe Institute as well. And I had seen the value of some of these, like binaural beat brainwave entrainment. I had actually used it to heal myself from volleyball injuries and things.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so it was always sort of a part that was always sort of there on the side in the background, just as an interest of things to explore. But for me, it was like, it had to make sense. It had to resonate for me, right? That was the one thing that I think my parents really gave me a gift of. Instead of indoctrinating me into a particular belief system, it was like, well, expose yourself to lots of things and then you make up your own mind. And, so that's what I did, and I explored a lot through my, late teens into my early 20s. But then when I got into grad school, I was just immersed in science, like 80 hours a week of left brain physics, research, classes, testing, all of this kind of, homework, all of that, 80 hours a week. And after a year of that, I was, really out of balance. I went from balance and diversity to out of balance within a year, and it left me in a state of feeling like, wow, something's really not right now. Like something's got to give, because I was very dissatisfied. I was starting to get a bit depressed from the whole experience of my
Wow.
first year of grad school. And ultimately, I'll just cut the story a little bit shorter, but ultimately, spirituality ended up being that main thing that brought back in a sense of purpose and joy and meaning. And it reminded me of why I was even pursuing the PhD in physics in the first place.
Wow. That's so interesting. Um, that's so interesting, and I agree. Like your parents, from the beginning, kind of gave you this sense of like trust that gut, trust that inner knowing.
Hmm.
And isn't it fascinating that you went into this full left brain and then it sounds like felt really disconnected? And one of the things that you said at the conference that I went to, it has never left me. And in fact, um, in a very roundabout way, I actually think it had really a big part to do with my starting this podcast. And I open, um, saying something that you said that just stuck with me and just resonated. And it was, you were talking at the time about, why one of the reasons you left science was because you realized we were getting smarter, but not wiser.
Hmm.
That landed with me like so hard. And I'm like, yeah, I want a podcast where we talk about that. How do we get wiser? How do we trade this left brain dominant, obsession and cognitive offloading for wisdom, you know? Um, so tell us a little bit about, what you found when you started. You have a whole class on Gaia, about, there's episodes on the Big Bang and how this all happened and what science says versus what ancient wisdom says. And as I read in your bio, you really marry these
Hmm.
so beautifully that even people who well, one of the things that you taught as well was why we're so like you talked about the industrial age and why this is so hard for so many people to swallow.
Mm.
And maybe you could start just by giving a little overview of how we've been conditioned and what
Okay.
we're having to overcome as we get into what I'm going to ask you next to buy into that.
Yeah. Yeah. So our conditioning largely comes from, we can trace it back to about 400 years ish to Isaac Newton. And when Isaac Newton was a very spiritual person, first of all. He was an alchemist, but he was also a scientist. He had a very kind of strong religious underpinning, but he ultimately came up with the laws of motion. He discovered that when an apple falls, if you will, is what governs that, right? So he kind of discovered the laws of motion specifically around gravity, but also like if any force is applied to, let's just say you're throwing a baseball, how can you calculate the trajectory and the speed and whatnot of that baseball, knowing the initial conditions, right? So knowing and the force of gravity that it runs under. So Isaac Newton, he was a major turning point from kind of this age where everything was based on religious belief and maybe some superstition and so forth, to we shifted into a scientific age. And he brought there's reason, there's reason why the stars are on their trajectory. There's reason why that things fall to the earth. There's reasons for all of these things, and we can understand it through the mathematical language, and therefore we can start to predict it, right? So it shifted things from this age of purely like religion, superstition, kind of creative right brain way of dealing with everything, to a logical, rational left brain way of dealing with things. And this, now he did warn, don't take God out of the picture, right? He didn't want us to try and take his equations and then try to make the universe into a great machine. But there were other people who came along later that took his laws of motion and then tried to apply exactly what he was warning against, which was making it into this: the universe is a great machine. It works like clockwork. We can predict everything, therefore we can control everything. So there's these principles that emerged out of his sort of physics, right? We call it classical physics now. And there's these four principles that emerge out of that. And then they started using these four principles and applying them into all other areas of life, and it kicked off the industrial age, and then it kicked off the age of enlightenment and sort of scientific rationalism. And for the last couple hundred years, we've been running and building our society based on these principles.
So
And
marketing, business, like
business, yeah, economics, marketing, relationship psychology, especially more Freudian psychology. You can get it into. I mean, our whole system, that works like a machine, if you will. Whether you're looking at the education machine or the global financial industry, or you're looking at government, all of it works in this kind of like mindset of compartmentalization. And if we can isolate things, then, and if we can understand how the individual parts work, then we should know how the whole works. And we can also therefore control it, and we should have predictable outcomes, and we should be able to predetermine. And rationalism is what ultimately became the highest value. We built a society based on: be rational, be logical, be reasonable. And so these four principles basically came down to, number one was separation. If you can, or reductionism, we can also call it that. So if you can reduce a whole to its constituent parts, like if you take a clock and you take that clock apart and you see all the gear wheels and so forth, and you understand how each part works, then you should know how the whole works. So this reductionism came in. And then, they said that all the parts kind of work separately, but also how the clock works should not affect how something, on the other side and down the road works, right? So there's a separation of the different parts.
which
And
we
the
know
only
isn't
way
true. Now we know that's not true.
Now we know that's not true, but then it was what they observed, that the only way that one item can have an effect on the other item is if there's a direct interaction, right? So it has to be kind of like the billiard balls. If you're playing pool and you hit one ball and it hits another, that will create a reaction. But if that ball doesn't hit the other ball, then there won't be any movement, right? So this kind of mindset of separation and reductionism. And then the third was determinism, right? If I know the formula of how things work, then I should be able to determine, knowing where it's starting from, where it's going to go. And so that then kind of predicts, right? We should be able to predict, and therefore we should be able to control. And therefore, if we know all of our initial conditions, it should work like clockwork. And then the final one was that everything is materially real, right? So it started to remove mind and consciousness from having any influence on the material world. And then that just became the realm of psychology, and maybe spirit became the realm of religion. But as far as science was concerned and industry, it was all about the material. And so these four principles, and then you add to that Darwinian evolution and this idea of competition and the survival of the fittest, these became the values that our industrial world really became built by. Um, and they led to success, right? I mean, they led to like a lot of progress scientifically, technologically, economically. It led to a lot of progress. But these principles got then extrapolated into all these other areas of life that weren't necessarily directly, about physics, but they became a formula for how to live in the physical world in so many different ways. And they led to progress, but now we're living in a world that is so much more complex, so much more interconnected. Things are happening a lot faster. And we've also discovered over 100 years ago, we discovered quantum physics, right? And quantum physics is not as, let's say, like from a physical macroscopic experience of the world, and it's not as intuitive for like in a common sense kind of way for people to grasp or wrap their heads around. There's some very strange things that happen in the quantum world, that it doesn't always equate with our day-to-day life, at least from the perspective that we've been programmed to believe through. Right. So if we've been programmed through this lens of industrialism and Newtonian kind of mindset and classical physics thinking and Darwinianism, then that's how we have learned to perceive everything. And then quantum physics comes along and it kind of turns all of those principles on their head. And it was harder for scientists, especially, to grasp it and to accept it, because it really sort of flipped everything upside down. It's almost like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole, and everything starts to get a little bit nonsensical. That's kind of like the feeling that quantum physics brings a person when you really start to dive into it. And but from my perspective, having come from in my education, I actually struggled more with classical physics than I did with quantum physics. To me, quantum physics actually made sense. It was interesting. For me, it was more intuitive because it connected in with this other realm of your thoughts actually can make a difference. That consciousness does play a role, and I had seen that in my own life, and so at a deep level for me, quantum physics is more intuitive. And whereas classical physics might have been logical and practical, but it didn't like resonate at a deep level for me. And so then when I got into grad school, and we're immersed, we're being programmed very much, in even though science now uses so much quantum physics, our education is first in classical physics. So our foundation is Newtonian classical, and they basically tell you, don't think about the philosophy, don't think about the meaning of it, don't get spiritual on us, just stick to the equations, pass your tests, do your research, do the derivations, all of this, and then at some point, once you pass your qualifying exams, and they now tell you you got to do your PhD research, and they say now you got to come up with something original. And that was a point for me where I was like, "What do you mean I got to come up with something original? You've taught me not to think originally for a long time, and not to ask questions, and don't get too creative. And now all of a sudden you want me to be creative?" So I was actually a bit lost at first, and so it was actually through pursuing my spiritual development again that it opened up. my creativity again. So I think that ultimately what was happening for me was by being so immersed in the left brain, logical, linear way of doing things, it threw me out of balance and it started to stifle my creativity and even my ability to access creativity or trust it. You talk about intuition. I think I always had a strong intuition, but I didn't trust it. And my education in science was actually my left brain was trained so strongly to just immediately discount anything that didn't make sense logically. And so in my journey of um, trying to find that balance again, I had to really open up again to that creative space and open up to that intuition and go through this experience of like, how do you quiet the doubting mind, the logical side, so that you can give airtime for that intuitive side to come back through. And I think that that's a really important piece when it comes to opening up to a quantum mindset as well.
And exactly why I named it the Intuition Incubator, because I feel like we have to incubate this because of everything that you explained to me then and that you just explained. Um, so this is where I think what you're saying is a lot of the rigidity around religion and how things are done. And this was all about certainty, about having certainty about whatever it is and needing to control. Um, Whereas the quantum is all of this unknown. And so that would favor curiosity, but we've been taught to be certain and to know for all the way up, right, to the government where nobody can say, "Mm, maybe that was a bad idea." You know, like maybe that, I should be a little more curious. But I was just actually interviewing Dr. Rich Melheim, who created a multiverse school. And what he said was um, education is not meant to stuff in, it's meant to draw out.
I like
And
that.
the Isn't that great? I mean, and the vision of education, of drawing out of someone, like not giving any answers, just asking more questions, right? Which, um, I have clients who are like, "Can you just tell me what to do?" And I'm like, "No,
Right.
I'm not gonna do that." Because you already know what to do. You've just been taught not to trust, not to even be able to find. And I know that's my personal experience too. Like there's stuff I know is in here. I just can't access it, because I've been so taught not to.
Yeah.
Um, And so one of the things I wanted to ask as you were talking is one of the ways that we talk about this often is that it's really from survival, fear based, right? If I can anticipate the worst case scenario, then I can keep myself safe. And so this is why we're constantly wanting to have everything dialed in and be very certain. But what you're saying is that it's beyond that. Like how much is which? How much is what? Is
Yeah.
the training from the industrial age or our evolution?
Well, right. I mean, the survival the survival mindset is going to be definitely partly evolutionary, and we had to learn to defend ourselves against threats, from our environment, from other people, from whatnot. And there's that animal self, if you will, the neurologically wired, the reptilian brain, the old brain, that part of us that kind of goes into fight flight when there is a threat in our environment. But in our more modern day, we don't necessarily always have as immediate present physical threats. I guess it depends on your
Sure.
environment and the conditions that you live in. But that part of us that controls that, which we can call, more the lower self or the ego, it needs a job, right? So then it takes its job is going to be when to preserve the self when there's any kind of potential threat. There's this preservation of the self, so it thrives in this fight flight freeze, but that's the animal self. That's not like our higher faculties. And when there isn't that immediate physical threat, then the ego kind of takes it and poses its to the emotional space or to the mental space, and it sort of fights for identity in emotional and a mental, belief systems and opinions and so forth. So that's where we end up getting ourselves into trouble and, being competitive when we don't really need to be. And, I love, and then, of course, the mindset of certainty, right? And the value base that was established during the industrial age and the Newtonian science, this science, this predictability, this, determinism, this things should be able to be controllable. That then created more fear when it came to uncertainty, right? Walking into the unknown. If it's unknown to me. And I think really ultimately it actually comes down to separation. When we believe that we're separate from things outside of us or from other people. If it's separate, now it's a potential threat. And then I have to fear it, right? Or I have to be on my guard. And so that mindset right there of separation, thinking of things as separate, is the most fundamental thing that I think we need to change. And as you step onto a path of adopting more of a quantum mindset, or if you look into ancient mystical teachings, they all say no, we're connected, right? We're all one. And so it completely changes the mindset. And then when you look at certainty versus uncertainty, quantum physics actually operates on there's always going to be uncertainty, and you can't control everything and you can't predict everything. And from this level, we might perceive certain things as there is a randomness inherent within the quantum space. Now, I feel though that from a perspective of if you can shift your consciousness to a higher plane of awareness and coherence, that you can actually influence what comes out of the quantum field. And then it's not so random, right? But it's about how we harness the observer effect. Um, but one of the beautiful things I think that comes in with this principle of uncertainty in quantum physics is rather than fearing the uncertainty because you can't control it, when you learn to surf within a quantum realm, you the uncertainty is what actually opens up the doorway to infinite possibilities. You have all these new potentials and possibilities that become available to you. And then it's a matter of learning to harness yourself, your will, your consciousness, your mind, harnessing it enough to influence and communicate with the quantum realm which of those possibilities you want to bring forward. So uncertainty actually opens up the door to greater potential. And then you have to move into it with greater optimism, but also I like I think curiosity and that sort of childlike wonder, really come in there to allow yourself to play with the possibilities within the sphere of imagination. And but then once you've identified which one you want to really bring forward, then it's about harnessing your ability to focus, harnessing your mind, harnessing your thoughts, harnessing your will to move a certain possibility forward. And but then it puts you much more in this realm of being the participant in co-creating your life rather than just a passenger of life. So there's so much more there's hugely empowering mindset that comes in when we can adapt a quantum way of looking at things. And yet we have to know that there is a certain place for a Newtonian way of approaching things as well. So to me, it's not either or, it's both in their proper context. But when you learn how to work with both, it gives you a real advantage in life.
Which is for the listeners, like why we're doing this, right? Like this is not like, just a science lesson, right? Like this is why we should care,
Mhm.
because if we can understand or wrap our head around the way that we've been conditioned and the actual reality, which is not what we think, it's not, so you have to see it to believe it. It's you believe it and then you'll see it. Then we care because we can have we're co-creating our lives, like you said. So give us tell us a little bit about that, because this is what you do. You help people access these realms so that they can create more of what they want, which, by the way, I mean, there is a lot of fear obviously involved in trusting. and in being curious and in stepping into that realm. I mean, it can be kind of quite terrifying. And I think, people listening that, think of themselves as control freaks or they like the safety. I think we all like the safety of certainty, whether we know it or not. But some people are very aware of like, yeah, I just can't let go. I can't, my mind keeps going on and on about how can I fix this problem? What's the next thing? What do I need to do? Da, 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 da.
Hmm. Well, I think the first step is learning to work with your mind and give it a new direction, right? Give it something to focus on that's productive and maybe active, but in a different way, right? So, a lot of times people say, "Oh, I can't meditate because I can't quiet the mind down," but actually it's really more just being aware of your thoughts. And I mean, mindfulness, right, is about being aware of your thoughts and not being attached to your thoughts. But then, down the line in higher levels of training and meditation, it's about giving your mind something to focus on, but that directs it. So it's like you're retraining your mind to work with you as your ally in a new way, rather than just sort of always getting in the way or just running the show. It's like we want to learn how to engage it in a way that makes it gives it a productive focus, first of all. So, some of what we're doing in the Quantum Learning Academy is training people how to harness the mind and achieve what we call a state of coherence, right? When you have multiple levels of thought going on. You have your subconscious levels of thought, you have your conscious levels of thought, you've got programs that are running in the background, you've got media influence coming in the foreground. So we have all these different kind of thoughts happening. And we need to learn to bring our whole being into greater coherence, right? Because, like a lot of people, they talk about trying to think positive, for example, right? If they do affirmations or positive thinking, uh, they might be consciously trying to work with these positive thoughts, but then they haven't addressed something at a deeper level. And subconsciously, they're not believing it, right? And so there's this dissonance, this cognitive dissonance that happens within, and they kind of sabotage their own results because of that. So, one of the things that's really important is that we learn how to bring the various parts of us into alignment, into coherence with each other, so that, what I'm thinking consciously and trying to bring in is also landing at a deeper level and being accepted at a deeper level. And part of it is learning to quiet, learning to access that stillness. But how we get led into that point of stillness is a big part of what we do within our, like, we've developed a quantum meditation technique that's about really leading us to that stillness point. And from that stillness point, then it opens up the space to access quantum potentials. And as we start accessing quantum potentials, we want to also learn to sense, to scan, to intuitively feel our way through the various possibilities, but know that as you go into that space, you have the ability to choose, right? So rather than fearing what's in the unknown, it's about that curiosity, but then it's like I get to choose what I want to create. Um, but in this, so it's empowering, but it also brings that piece of responsibility, right? Being self-responsible for what you're creating in your life. So it does require a certain level of maturity to come in. And but if you want to be empowered and live a better life, then these are all just part of the process. So what we do in the Quantum Learning Academy, and also what I do within my teachings with the Mystery School work is, there are two different approaches. The mystery school work goes more towards the mystical and is very directly spiritual and working with ancient spiritual practices. The Quantum Learning Academy is more about using quantum physics as a framework, a mindset, and then a couple techniques that we've developed that really work with those quantum principles to help us achieve that greater coherence of mind and body and heart and so forth, to be able to create a more successful life. So there's different, just depending on the individual, which way they want to go, or they can go in both directions because they're complementary to each other. Um, And yeah, so meditation is certainly part of it, right? Learning to work with the mind, learning to quiet the mind, but also it's about knowing thyself, right? The more you come to know yourself, the more you can recognize when that doubting self comes in, or when that sort of um, deeper parts of you that are sort of wounded or programmed to feel not worthy or not good enough. You got to recognize these parts of your inner voice or your inner sort of programming, and then realize that, okay, no, that's just a program. That's just a script from the past that I'm playing. And the truth is, much more beautiful, much greater. There's so many possibilities, right? So we bring in the proper knowledge as well to really help people orient towards a new mindset, a new framework. But so the mind needs something to grab onto. Um, and we've been programmed a certain way and according to certain beliefs. And we have to reevaluate that. Does that serve? Is it the truth? Right? Where does it serve? Right? Is it maybe it's helped you to a certain point, but is it still helping you? Right? So as we grow and evolve, we're always having to reevaluate what we believe. And I think that curiosity and that self-reflective sort of introspection comes in to say, okay, well, is that true, or is that just what I've been taught to believe? Or is that something that I decided upon and formulated as a belief system, but I did that with limited understanding and limited knowledge, so I couldn't quite understand the bigger picture, the context that event happened in. And so we kind of reevaluate some of these old beliefs as we go through our personal journey, whatever system that a person might be following as they're doing their personal growth. These are all parts of the alchemy, if you will, that transformational process that everyone goes through. So what we're doing with Quantum Learning Academy specifically, though, is helping people understand. Okay, look, this is the old paradigm of the Newtonian mindset. This is the newer paradigm of the quantum mindset. Here's where they play their role in their proper context. But what one analogy that's really helpful that I think people can relate to is, imagine you have like a game, like a chessboard, a strategy game, right? So let's just say chess. And you've got this sort of checkered pattern of a board, and you have your chess pieces, and you have your pawns and your kings and your queens and your knights and your bishops and your rank and file. And in the chess game, you have certain rules. Each player, each piece can be moved certain ways, and it's very linear. It's very logical. It's very strategic. And if you know how to, you know, some people may be experts and pros, the masters of playing chess, and then others are not so good at it, right? And if you have somebody who's like just a beginner and has only basic knowledge of how to play chess well, and then they're put up against somebody who's like a pro at it, then they're going to get beat really quickly. But let's say, so we like to look at the chessboard like a Newtonian kind of mindset. You have very specific rules and very specific strategy of how it works. And then there's, let's say there's another board. Like, let's say you have this chessboard, but you could land on certain squares within the chessboard, and that square, if you know how, it can actually beam you up to another board above it. And this board that's playing at this higher level is checkers, right? Where you can kind of leap over things, and it's a different set of rules. And so all of a sudden you kind of get on the right square, you move up to the checkers board, and now you can, if you know how to play by those rules, you can then, do different moves and then come back down onto the chessboard, and you've from the chessboard's perspective, you've made a move, and it's like, wait, how did you do that? That's not possible. That's not part of the rules. Right? So you're operating on two different realms. And if you had somebody who was just sort of a basic average chess player, but then they knew how to also play the checkers game. They
They
knew
could
how to
clean up.
play the Newtonian and the quantum. Even if they're playing against a pro on the chessboard, if that pro only knows how to play chess and not checkers, then they're going to lose, right? So The person who knows both games is going to have a much greater advantage, and they're probably going to win. So this is, kind of the how when we need to operate at Newtonian, but when you can also operate at quantum, and knowing how to move between the two different sets of rules and shift into the higher game board so that you can have greater advantage, right? So this is where we see having both mindsets in their proper context is really going to support people in having an advantage in life and being more successful.
Yeah, and that school, that is the understanding the quantum mindset is really the information piece that is needed, to be able to. I mean, knowledge is power, right? When you understand what you're doing, one of the I want you to go back to though this issue because I think it's a huge issue. I know I work with it a lot in my work. Is the the disconnect between understanding with your intellectual mind what is possible, what you can create, because now you have you have all the information. You understand the quantum, you da da da, but you have some programming, a deep-seated belief that when you go into the gap and you go into, that stillness to try and create, you're coming up against a deeper part of yourself, a deeper unworthiness program, whatever it is that's saying, how do you help someone with that? What do you recommend when someone is really just coming up against that and they understand it all? Like, I know what I got to do.
Mhm.
And yet their third center's going off and,
Mhm.
when they're in that meditation saying, breaks.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 things. So, this is where, for example, yeah, I know that like The Secret and the Law of Attraction and Power of Intention was really popular for a while, but it I think was hit and miss, right? Because people would run into this
Hit the
exact
miss.
problem, right? They'd be
Yeah.
thinking about what they want to from a positive place create, but then it wasn't always working, right? And that's because there was some sabotage happening underneath. So part of the problem is again, what place, what level of mind are you coming from when you say this is what I want to create? Right? Is it coming from ego, or is it truly coming from a higher state of consciousness? Is it coming from the higher possibilities, or is it coming from attachment to the world? So we have to kind of move into a space where we're not coming from our attachments. Um, that's really big, right? We can't have attachment to the outcome, and or yeah, like it's like, oh, I'm if you're going in with a question, for example, and you have an attachment to what you want the answer to be, then your lower mind is going to keep coming in and interfering, trying to get the intuitive answer to actually match what the ego wants to hear. And that's not intuition. But people do it all the time, right? Because they have attachment. So we have to get to this space where we're not so attached. We're really just in this openness. Like the mind needs to be quiet. The lower mind needs to be quieted down. So that's step number one is we got to get to this place where we can quiet the lower mind down. Now, in our quantum meditation technique, we're leading people into that real space of quietness. And that becomes the doorway into the quantum. And the other key is, we also have another method that we call the whole being validation technique, which is how when I have an idea, right, I'm going to check that idea against various levels of my being and sense whether it's resonating and aligned, or whether there's a dissonance at some level of my being. And if there's a dissonance at some level of me, then what do I need to do to bring this into greater alignment? What needs to shift, right? So we can take just an idea through this validation process to really make sure that it's coherent at every level. And so we have this another meditation technique where we bring people through that, and you lead, but you have to kind of tune into the body, not just the mind, right? So we're using the body as a detector, if you will, and as you tune into the subtle feelings, the subtle sensations that happen, um, you can assess when you get out of the head and get into the body. Your body there's a certain part of it that you can tune into that really will tell you the truth. and whether something resonates or is dissonant. And so these are various techniques that we have to support people. There's multiple steps, right, to being able to really create in the quantum space, because we want to make sure that when we take something into that quantum space and we say that's the possibility I want to manifest out, we really want to make sure that this is aligned, because it's very powerful. You will get what you
What you want,
focus
right? That's right. Watch
on.
out, right? Yeah. But
And
here's the. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, just so that place of trusting, right? And really checking and making sure, okay, before I use this, because it's powerful, before I use this, I want to make sure it's really aligned, and that I have that resonance and that yes, I get that feeling of yes at each step, and then I can trust it, right? And then I can quiet that doubting mind from coming in and interfering in the moment of bringing it through the quantum meditation process.
And so I think one of the things that gets confusing for people is trying to figure out who's saying yes, what I is saying yes, and what I is saying no. And, I think particularly, for well, I mean everybody really, but people that, have suffered some trauma or whatnot, you can get in that space and you can say, okay, let's just take something simple to make it, like I want a loving relationship, right? So that's just pure. Why not? Why shouldn't you have that? And you go through that process, right? But there's something that comes up as you're checking in with every part of your body that says no because you don't feel worthy of it. It's not that it's not in alignment or not of your greater good or coming from a good place, the desire, but it's this belief that you can't shake. And so you come out of the meditation and you're like, God, I can't get past this, right? And so what is it then that I know sort of what I think about the next step is, but I'm curious to know what you suggest.
Lean into it, right? It's like get curious with yourself. Okay, why? What is this, right? What is this? What part of me? And you just start asking a bunch of questions, and tune into that space wherever it was. Like, let's say it was in your heart, or let's say it was in your gut, and some part of you is not feeling aligned there, or not giving you a yes there, right? Then you got to go into that and say, okay, why, right? What needs adjustment, or does something need healing here, or is there something I need to shift in my mindset, or is there some emotion that I got to let go of, or some attachment that I got to let it go of? So there's a process that we do to come to really know ourselves and know all these different levels of our being, and yeah, we gotta do some healing potentially, right? And I would say all healing begins with forgiveness. So if you're looking at, oh, there's something here that feels unworthy, right? For example, why do I feel unworthy? And what part of me, feels unworthy? And then who or what do I need to forgive? Like, how far back does this go in my life? So there's a bit of excavation, if you will, into your own past and into your own programming to find the source of that. And then from there, once you can tap into the source, where's that origin point? Where did that start? And it's not so much about having to talk your way through it with a therapist, for example. I mean, that can serve some people, but like the challenge that we have to be careful of there when it comes to um, talking about it is what is our purpose of talking about it? Are we talking about it just to talk about it and dig ourselves more deeply into that story? Or are we talking about it so that we can find some resolution with it? And so long as we're seeking resolution and the healing, and then really identifying like who or what do I need to forgive? Who or what belief system did I take on that I might need to reevaluate here? And these things, if they're in our past and it's something we haven't resolved within us, then it can show up at any time in our life, right? In any situation. It's like kind of that old adage of how you do anything is how you do everything. Like, you can take a snapshot of your day and just like look at what you're thinking, what you're doing, what you're saying on a day-to-day basis. If you just did a little like mapping of your day of what everything you thought, said, and did, one day will give you a really clear blueprint of what's going on in your subconscious, because our subconscious is our habits. It's our habitual way of thinking. It's our habitual way of talking. It's our habitual way of doing things. And so we need to really take a look at that. And then, is there something, if I want to make a change in my subconscious programming, like if I have a belief system that I'm not worthy somewhere, at a subconscious level, and I can identify that because it keeps coming up on a, periodic basis. Okay, what can I start to shift in my day to day to create a different wiring, a different, foundational kind of pattern? And so this is also something that we work with in the Quantum Learning Academy, called, there's a quantum resolution technique, right? Where it's how do we resolve these sort of old places within the self where we might sabotage the results, or we might trip ourselves up and not be aligned with our highest sort of quantum expression. The Quantum Learning Academy is something that I've co-founded with my husband, Alan Weick, and he is an extraordinary integrative therapist as well. And he's drawing from years and years of working with clients and in a integrative therapeutic kind of setting. He's studied the full gamut of all the various methods and techniques out there in that sphere. And, so we're drawing together, I would say, some of the best techniques of, integrative therapy techniques, mystical practices, quantum physics, the understanding the science, the biology of how we work, how our brain rewires, right? Really understanding who we are. So we work with these four pillars, like who are we within the body, right? Understanding how the body works. And its signals. Who are we within the mental space, like understanding how your mind works, and then how the mind and the body really connect. And then we also have, the soul and the spirit, and the soul being a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, and the spirit being more that kind of highest consciousness, that eternal essence of you. And so we bring these four pillars together to create a more comprehensive system. And so I'm coming in from, this like deep training in physics and metaphysics and, ancient spiritual practices. And my husband's coming in with this deep training in integrative therapy and mind body. And, we're weaving the two together and creating, according to real quantum principles and formulas, to be that overall framework for people to learn and discover through. But it's a journey. It's not there's
Yes.
no one kind of, oh, I'm going to go and have this weekend experience and that's going to fix everything. No, it's a process, right? Because we've programmed ourselves and wired our whole neurology according to certain patterns throughout our life. That takes time to rewire, and it's a journey of transformation that we go through with people. So we have multiple different programs and training, but we start off with something called iQuantum, which is what you attended, right? That's that 3-day event where we really get into what are the old kind of Newtonian mindset, what is the quantum principles. Let's really come to understand the what these four principles are, right? So we can boil it down to four quantum principles. What are they? How do they work? How does it apply to us? We're not just talking about how it applies like to the subatomic levels. We're talking about how does this apply to us? And how can we, take that on as a new framework to perceive through, but to actually, try on those lenses and perceive your life through that quantum viewpoint takes time. But it takes time and practice. That's that practicing it every day, and you get tools to work with on a day to day basis. That for the people who really put it into application in their life, it's going to start that rewiring process. And then from there, we have other programs that are currently being developed, also that continue to lead people through the deeper journey of that rewiring and really embracing that quantum mindset.
Yeah, so much that you just said there, and one of the things that I heard you say around that question was, maintaining curiosity, right? Like when you're coming up against that, asking questions, right? Because the mind's going to want to shut it down and be like, "Nope, we've already got the answers. You're not worthy,"
Yeah.
and just getting curious alone, right? Is opening that right brain. And now you're just by asking the question, you're closer to the quantum, like, that's interesting. I feel like I'm blocking this. I wonder what's happening here. And
Yeah.
that's part of the process.
Yeah.
Um,
I can I
and
can
I
add
think
really
go
quick.
ahead.
Just to add to that, so yeah, curiosity is a really important piece. Also realizing, I mean, some people I think fear going into it, they avoid it, right? So they'd rather not deal with what's there because it's skeletons in the closet, so to speak, and they don't want to. So, there has to be the curiosity, but there also has to be a recognition that if I just keep doing what I've always been doing and I don't look at
Yeah.
this, and I'm just going to keep getting the same results. So if you want new results, you got to start doing things differently. And here, we're presenting a formula, a pattern that people can follow that will aid them in looking at those things that have been getting in the way. So sometimes people have to get to that place of being sick and tired of being sick and tired, or only ever getting so far in life, and they can't break through that wall. Well, yeah, you can break through the wall, but you got to start doing things differently. And this is where there just has to be a certain commitment to oneself, so
Yeah.
curiosity, but also commitment to oneself to grow and to get better.
Yeah, no, 1,000%, and that's so much, what my work and what I want this podcast to be about and to attract those people who are really curious. They're in question. You can't change without a question. And you mentioned, therapy. And as a, former psychotherapist, I always say, you can know exactly why you feel the way you feel. And you can keep going around and talking about it. Oh, yep, that makes sense. And that makes sense. And you can never change. Or you can really never know exactly why you feel the way you feel. And you can create tremendous change.
Mhm.
But you have to, as you say, you have to really want that kind of journey. And I can say from being someone who wants that journey and always wants that journey and will never stop wanting that journey, whatever level I get to, there's always another one. There's always another layer of the onion, right? Excuse me. I can say going to your conference with Alan was really, really, really a great experience. And help that evolution. I want to ask you what how you know when you're following your intuition. First, what do you think intuition is, and how do you know when you're following it and when you're not in your life?
Yeah, for me, intuition is something that I think has always been strongly there and guiding my life, but I haven't always listened to it. But when it came to the big decisions in life, that's when really, I didn't want to make the wrong decisions. So I'd be contemplating a lot. I'd be considering and weighing pros and cons and all of that. But ultimately, when I look back on my life, when I had those big decisions to make, it came down to a feeling um, for me. And so, for example, which university I chose to go to, I looked at lots of different universities, but there was one, that just felt right. And then same thing with graduate school. I looked at a bunch of different grad schools, but there was one that just like this, my body just gave me a yes. Everything about it, just felt right. And it's a combination of the internal feeling, and when I say that from a scientific perspective, I would say this is actually part of the autonomic nervous system. This is part of the deep brainstem uh, functions of the body. In science today, they even call it, like, if you read some of Malcolm Gladwell's book, Link, right? And it's called, they call
Yeah.
it thin slicing. And within 2 seconds or less, you actually can measure up a situation to at least 85% accuracy, and there's no logic involved in it. It's just taking in information around the environment, and there is a certain amount of if you're an expert at something, it's become second nature. So then you're going to have more accuracy. But even people who are not like a pro at something and have those 10,000 hours of developing a skill set, they can still just within that 2 seconds or less have this thin slicing of 85% accuracy. So science calls it thin slicing. I call it intuition. Your body gives you signals, right? And it's anywhere from maybe the arms standing up on uh, the hair standing up on your arms or the back of the neck. It could be a feeling of just relaxation in the body versus a feeling of tension in the body. It could be heart rate. It can be breathing rate. It can be, can I feel settled in my body or do I feel like some kind of you know, butterflies in the stomach, right? All of these are physical feelings that our body gives us. And it's really a matter of paying attention to it. A lot of people just learn to ignore them because they think that's just how they always are. Maybe they start thinking it's their anxiety issues. Um, and sometimes maybe there is emotional stuff or biases. They also talk about the dark side of thin slicing when our biases come in and sort of overlay on top. So we have to clean things up. But the more you clean things up, in terms of what's going on at a deeper level within the self, the more accurate your intuition becomes. So I remember in my journey, especially in my work with mystery school stuff, like I went from not trusting my intuition, even though it was there, and my big decisions ultimately were made on it. I had been very programmed into a scientific way of thinking by the time I got into my spiritual, like really focusing my spiritual journey and, I remember these points along the way where I would have an intuitive thought come through, but then my left brain, my rational mind would kinda come in immediately and say, "That's silly. That's ridiculous. Why would you do that? You don't need to do that." And so I started to recognize when that narrative came in because I had this series of events synchronistically, I had this series of events that were really starting to show me as I was doing my personal growth and I was trying to clean up and I had an intention. I want to improve my intuition and have a greater, kind of connection of sense of wisdom and guidance coming through. And I had these like events, little things where I'd have a thought and then I'd immediately discount the thought. And then later, like within 30 minutes, an hour, I would have an experience where it's like, oh, I should have listened to that first thought. Like one example where I really started to pay attention to it was I was going to the chiropractor one day and I parked the car and this little voice kind of came into my mind and said, "Oh, take your credit card in." But immediately then my left brain came in and said, "You don't need to take your credit card in. They have your credit card on file. Don't be silly. Just leave it here." And so I didn't take my credit card in. I went to the chiropractor. I came out and as I was checking out, they're like, "Oh, your credit card expired. We need your new credit card." And, just simple things like this. And it was like, oh man, I had that thought. I should have, trusted it. And I didn't. So I started to really pay attention to when my logical mind was discounting something that came through that seemed irrational or illogical. And I just thought, well, let's just try. If there's no harm in trying, let's just try and see what happens here. And so I started to follow and hear, recognize those different inner voices that came through, if you will, different thoughts that came through. And in time, the more I tried to just follow what was coming through intuitively and just see if no harm is going to be done in just trying this, let's see what happens. And it continued to be validated that that was the right thing to do. So I learned over time to reprogram myself from this only relying on my rational mind and left brain
Yeah.
to no, I can trust this again. And so it was these little events that, it was no harm one way or another. So it's these little things that I just learned to trust that intuitive voice more. And then in time I trusted it. I knew, no, this is accurate. I don't always know. For me, it's what I would call a kind of a kinesthetic feeling. And in sort of psychic terms, we call it clairsentience, where you just know. You just feel it
Yeah.
and you just know, and you don't I can't necessarily say how I know or why I know, but I know. But I've learned to trust it, and it's become, very validated in my life. And, in terms of what we could call intuition, I would say it's a communication with the field. You have both the field around you of environmental stimulus, and you have the field of the quantum field, you have the energetic, the biofield, right? There's information coming in all the time. And as we improve, as we become more and more aware, right, more and more conscious, we learn to mediate and become in tune with this information that's coming to us from the field, both physical and spiritual. And so intuition strengthens in time
Yeah.
the more aware you become.
I love that. And, one of the things I love what you said is that, that all came from, self observation, right? Like, I think so often we get kind of, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And again, you were like, recognize the thought. That's interesting. I think I'll just track that for a little while. We also are so used to like, I want it now. I want to change now. I want to change now. Right. It's like, let me have some patience. You said intention. I said intention to just get a little curious to watch. And I don't know, I have this hypothesis, and maybe it's well known. And I'm just, but what I think about when I think about how we know that things change when they're being observed, right? We know that water changes when it's being observed, and you can explain that a lot better than I can. And the whole slit experiment and all of that. And if we just observe our inner world,
Mhm.
that's going to have the same impact. Things change when they are observed without any interference, right? You don't
Yeah.
have to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in a quantum physics context, we call it the observer effect. That as soon as, so in quantum physics, it's saying that things can be in a superposition of possible states, right? Like a photon could be in multiple potential states, but until we actually make a measurement of it, we don't know what state it's in. And only upon measuring it, which we would say is an observation, does it then, what in quantum physics we call collapse the waveform. It shifts from a state of possibility into a state of actuality and measurability. And so it's our intention to observe something, and not just the intention, but the act of observing it, that makes it more tangible and makes it go from this sort of virtual state of possibility into this actual state of physicality. And so our consciousness can become an observer, right? We can observe life. We can observe ourselves, as you're saying. We can observe things in the quantum field as well. When you learn to get into the right state of coherence, and yes, our act of observing actually um, informs, right? We're informing the quantum field, and then the quantum field sort of gives us back according to how we're informing it. So I think that that also gives us really interesting um, perspective to realize, like, well, what are you assuming, right? Because sometimes your assumptions and your biases will inform the field, and the field will give it back to you. And then you create this confirmation bias, right? Because it just feeds back exactly what you're expecting to have happen. But if you can suspend your expectations and just say, okay, I have no expectation. I'm not going to project what I think it is. I'm just going to really just be open and just really receive and broaden my ability to perceive what might be there, right? And we have to be open to many possibilities at that point. Then your intuition can come in more
Yeah.
strongly in those moments.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm chuckling to myself because we just got a cat, and my 14-year-old is worried that this cat is going to bond with someone else, and he wants it to bond with him. And he's so stuck on it. He's like, okay, hand the cat over. You're holding him too long. And I just keep thinking to myself, he's creating a
Yeah, yeah.
field around him where this cat is going to find someone else to be a favorite to.
And potentially start avoiding him because he's smothering too much, right?
Right, right, right. Okay, well, so you have this amazing conference that's coming up in April 24th to 27th, right?
Yeah, I believe it's
Something like
the
that?
25th, 26th, 27th. It's in Reno, Nevada. It is called the iQuantum event. And so it's a 3 days. This is kind of our flagship with the Quantum Learning Academy, where it's a good dive into what are the quantum principles. So understanding the mindset that we've been programmed with and where we're coming from, but then what we need to shift into to kind of broaden our scope of possibilities and learn to play the game at both levels, not just the physical level, but also the quantum level. And so we dive into that. There's a lot of experience. It's not just about information. There's no prior science background needed. There's no math involved. It's really it's open to anybody, so long as they have an open and curious mind, right? If
Yeah.
somebody's closed minded, this probably isn't the program for you. If somebody doesn't want to change anything, this is probably not the program for you. But if you're somebody who really wants to uh, start really accessing a greater creative advantage, you want to really shift things into a quantum mindset and learn how to really do it, not just talk about it. Like I think there's a lot of people out there talking about quantum and kind of in a hand waving sort of way, like it's all quantum, saying everything is energy, therefore everything is quantum. Well, that's not, we're really about helping people understand more of the nuance and the intricacies of what do we mean by quantum? Like, what really is that? Why should we care? How does that apply? How do we use it? And the really understanding some of the ins and outs of how it applies. Let me give you an example of how it applies at a quantum level, like at the subatomic levels, so that then we can see how we can extrapolate that to apply it towards a mindset. And then from there, learning techniques, and as part of it, they receive also the quantum meditation. There's an actual album that they'll receive that they can work with on an ongoing basis. We've got a whole new meditation that's an open eye meditation that gives a lot of visual kind of input and rewiring that is we're very excited about. And so we're really intent on, weaving together the information with the integration, right? How do we really apply that and integrate that into our life? How do we ground it from this kind of abstract conceptual level to, real tangible examples and experiences? And this 3 day training, I think, gives people a lot of keys. There's a lot of opportunity for aha moments that come through
Yeah.
to really support you in shifting that mindset. And then from there, it's an opening to a journey that if people want to step onto that journey of really integrating this new mindset with us, then we've got further opportunities down the line for how to really take it further.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because I do think there's a lot of people that call themselves quantum healers and quantum this and everything. Like this is like the real deal. It's like real no, like really, let's really understand the quantum as it relates to you from a science and practice perspective. I know that was my experience. So I'll have all of those in the show notes, links for registering and all of that stuff. What do you want to leave people with? If you wanted anybody, if people to know just one thing, what is the one thing that you just want people to know?
You know what? Our world is rapidly changing right now. And we are, I would say, going through a bit of an accelerated process of change and transformation. And as we look at the world and where it's at right now and where things are heading, if for those who are paying attention, where things are heading is like within 5 years from now, this world is going to be very different than it is today. And there's a rapid acceleration happening right now. So much of it is being some of it's being obviously driven by technology. There's a lot of new technology coming out, but a lot of that technology is based on quantum principles. I
Yeah.
mean, we even just had, the Google come out with their quantum computer announcement, like that they've cracked some of the code to finally start bringing quantum computers. That's going to revolutionize the world. And that's not even talking about all the other stuff. There's the AI, there's so many things going on right now that is really going to change our world and in the short term. And we need to stay adaptable, right?
Mhm.
We need to really be able to shift in order to keep up with the changes that are happening because there's always changes happening from one generation to the next, but we've hit this inflection point where the change is, like gone exponential. And so that, I think people really feel that, it's like it's hard to keep up. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's so many dynamic energies going on right now. And it can be stressful for people who don't know how to shift and adapt into those changes. So, to me, the quantum mindset is so important right now because it gives us a new framework to support us in being adaptable, to support us in jumping into these new possibilities that are before us with excitement and enthusiasm rather than fear and stress. It helps us learn to thrive with uncertainty. It helps us recognize the importance of realizing that we're all connected, we're not separate,
Yeah.
and how we need to make this shift. Our values are starting to shift, and they need to shift at a fundamental level for us to harness the times that are before us right now. As you kind of said, that is one of my reasons for why I moved from just going down the track of becoming a research scientist in physics to doing this work was because I saw like the pace of technology and knowledge is accelerating really fast, but our wisdom needs to keep up with it. And our ability to harness that knowledge towards the good of the whole, harness that technology towards the good of the whole, rather than just the egoic desires of the few. This is such a critical time on the planet, and a shift in human consciousness is a big piece of that. So the kind of people that I'm here to work with, and that I think that the work that we're bringing forward is really geared towards is the people who want to be part of the solution, who want to be part of the change, and who are ready to be active contributors to making those changes within their own lives and their own mindset. But then also, how do you in your own sphere of influence carry that forward into the world? Like these are the times that we're in right now. So not everybody's wanting to do that, but there are, I think there's, anywhere from, I mean, you could go with the 80-20 rule, 20% of the people are ready to do 80% of the
Yeah.
work. And those are the kinds of people that we're here to work with. Um, and, the rest of them, they don't want to do the work. So this isn't for you. But if you want to, I think if you want to, um, if there was a message, regardless, whether you want to do the work or don't do the work, I think that the times ahead are going to be bringing a lot of change. I think it's something to look forward to, not to fear. I think there's a lot of hope, personally, even if it seems like, things are crazy out there. I think there's a lot of hope. But the more that we can be active participants in steering the tipping points that we're at right now and steering it towards a better outcome for the good of the whole, the more people who are doing that and actively, stepping up to it, the better our outcome will be, if you look 10 years down the road from now.
Oh my God, that's a whole nother episode. Like, literally, I want to talk to you again about just that. Like,
Mm.
that we are one, that the hope, the higher consciousness, it is a whole nother episode. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the opportunity to chat with you and also with your audience. So I hope it reaches the people who are ready for it.
Me too.